Redfin has come out with an article listing 10 of their predictions for 2022 with some pretty interesting stuff in it. The Fed has signaled an interest rate hike may be more imminent than originally anticipated, and we talked to Mark Lloyd, mortgage banker with Leader One, about the prediction of the mortgage rates.
This is the RealCast podcast with your host, Mike Connors.
Good evening and welcome to the RealCast, the podcast all things real estate. I'm Mike Connors, owner of the property management company, The Pro Landlords, investor, team leader and founder of the Real Pro team with eXp Realty in Maine, part-time police officer, father, 5 kids, what else? Ordained minister. Lots of titles, no letters after my name. How are things going in the new year? We're 10 days in. How many of you have already stopped going to the gym for the new year?
Do you think Clint Eastwood ever made a New Year's resolution? He wrote in his dream journal, to be present?
Okay, let's get into it. We got a lot to cover today. So things are changing a lot. Shouldn't take me saying this on this show for you to have already figured that out. But if you haven't already come to that conclusion yourself, you should probably just step outside, take a look around. No, really, I'm being serious. In the last few years, things have changed drastically in almost every aspect of everything in the world. Real estate isn't immune to this change either. Take, for example, back in 2016 or 17, if you can think back that far, real estate was fairly simple. You looked at a house, you liked it or you didn't. If you didn't like it, you looked at another one until you found one that you liked. Once you did that, you put an offer in, and the seller either accepted it, countered it, or declined it. You went through this process until you got a house under contract, you had a building inspection done, you got a mortgage if you weren't paying cash, and you closed on it. The end. It was fairly easy to determine if the house was valued appropriately or not. If you were buying the property for an investment, after closing, you would advertise it on Craigslist, do a bunch of showings, and I mean a bunch, lower the rent a few times, and then finally find a tenant who you maybe scribbled something down on a napkin, called it a lease, shook their hands, took the money, and gave them the keys. Now things are a whole lot different. You look at one house and immediately put in an offer 40% over asking price because you don't want to miss the opportunity. You likely still lose the bidding war and move on to the next one until maybe you're finally lucky enough to get one. If it's an investment, you advertise it and within 10 minutes of hitting post, you've got 60 showings scheduled and 45 applicants. Your lease agreement is 35 and a half pages long and rent is $7,000 a month and the tenant is responsible for everything. Now, for those of you still with me, this is a bit of an exaggeration, but it's really not far off. So the question is, will this continue and how long can it last?
Didn't we do this yesterday?
Now more than ever in history, you have to pay attention to changing laws that change almost every other hour, it seems. Politics, local ordinances, the economy, and a whole slew of other things. It's not as simple as it used to be. Far from it. It's why a lot of real estate investors who once managed their properties themselves have turned to professional property managers to manage for them. It's worth it to them for the extra expense to have someone else keep up to date on all of this. The problem is, folks as a whole, and certainly real estate investors, are seeing a lot of short-term uncertainty. Tune into any show that has Economist and you'll hear a different prediction of what's to come with the economy, and specifically the real estate market. Some say that this crazy market will continue for years. Others say months. Some say there's an imminent crash coming. The problem is, you need to shift your focus to more long-term. What's the long play? What is your end game?
I wanna be an end game.
So back to the question. Will this continue and how long can it last? And more importantly, what does 2022 have in store for us? Well, Redfin chief economist Daryl Fairweather released back in November 2021, so just a few months ago, an article with her 10 predictions of the 2022 market. She thinks that 2022 will bring a more balanced housing market, but she cautions to not expect a buyer's market, just more inventory, less frenzy, and slower price growth. Redfin's first prediction is that the mortgage rates will rise to 3.6%. I talked to Mark Lloyd from Leader One to get his take on this. Mark is a mortgage banker with the mortgage banking firm Leader One Financial Corporation. Mark is licensed in Maine, New Hampshire, and Florida, and specializes in residential home loans for real estate purchases and refinances. Mark, anything else you'd like to add about your background or what you do?
Yeah, basically we specialize in first-time home buyers, seasoned home buyers. Basically, whatever your housing needs, we're there for you, whether it's a conventional loan, FHA, VA, USDA, all the government loans. So we're there to help you out.
Cool. So, first question I have for you. I know we went through this last week and technical glitches, so I appreciate you taking more time to answer these questions. But Redfin released 10 predictions for 2022, and their first prediction is that the mortgage rate is going to go up to 3.6%. What is the mortgage rate currently?
So it's currently at 3.5. Now the rates have actually probably gotten worse since we talked last week because the bond's down another like 30, 40 points already. But it's at 3.5. It's probably going to go up to 4. So it's definitely going to be going up higher.
Okay. So how do mortgage rates differ regionally or like geographically? Is it kind of standard across the country, or, is it different from, say, here in Maine versus California or even Florida?
So, yes, they are sometimes regionally different, but it's the investors that basically control the rates. Will happen sometimes. It's like, say, Florida or even Boston or something like that. Their rates sometimes might be lower because just because of the sheer volume of what they're doing, the companies will basically aren't paying the loan officers as much. So they're keeping their overhead really low. So the competition is so low that the companies are just basically making their money from volume. Whereas in the smaller rural areas, there's not as much volume.
Sure.
So it's basically it's the difference between the volume. So if there's a lot of volume, they can reduce their rates and still make as much money, but in rural areas that you just don't have the volume. So in order to be profitable, the rates are slightly different.
Sure. So it's interesting because this article that Redfin released was published back in November, but last Wednesday, I believe it was, the Fed announced much sooner than folks had imagined that they may be increasing the interest rate sooner than anticipated. How does the Fed increasing the interest rate correlate to what we see with mortgage rates?
They don't really correspond too much. The federal funds rate is actually it's the interest rate at which depository institutions lend reserve balances to each other overnight. Basically, because they're required to have a certain amount of money to lend. So what happens is they end up lending money from other banks. So the Fed fund rate is actually that the Feds determine what that overnight rate is. It's more or less on a banking side, not so much with mortgages. Mortgages are based on the mortgage-backed security on the bond market.
Okay. So when the Fed made the announcement last week, the stock market plummeted. Even crypto, which is supposed to not be affected by things like inflation, dropped.
Yep.
It really dropped. There were a few hours in the afternoon into the evening where the charts were almost like a vertical line straight down. So we know that mortgage rates being higher would actually be a good thing for the price of real estate as far as being more affordable to buyers, and that we would see some of these overly inflated prices come back down a bit and give maybe first-time home buyers a chance to get into a new home for a little bit of a better cost. And we hear people fearful of rising mortgage rates because they think it's going to make their payments go through the roof. Would it be accurate when I say that if the mortgage rate goes from, say, 3% to 3.6%, you're really only going to see about $100 per month increase in your payment?
Yeah, so on some of that stuff, they the first part of what caused the rates to go up and everything plummet is basically high inflation. So normally what happens, like when the stock market's doing good, usually the bond market's doing bad, and that's where the mortgages come from. So it usually, because the reason being, when the stock market's doing good, you can earn 8, 10, 12+%, whereas your bonds are really safe, but you're only earning 2 to 3%. So if the stock market's doing good, people will pull their money out of their bonds and put them into the stock market. So therefore, kind of making the bond market, bad, and making the stock market good. But then what you've had right now going on is you basically, due to the high inflation, people are just pulling money out of both stock market and the bond market, just doing it basically right to cash or stuff that's more liquid. And there's also other facts like all these different reports. Like the jobs report came out last week, and they were expecting like 450,000 new jobs. In actuality, it was actually ended up only being 190,000. So a lot of people, that also further the thing of people panicking, which caused people to pull their money out of stocks into the bonds. But far as like the differences as far as pricing, even if the rates go up and causes the prices go down a little bit, you're still better off buying now, or actually you would have been better off buying 3 months ago, just because say like a $250,000 house, with a 3.5% interest rate, your P&I, your principal and interest, is 11.22. So say the rates go up to 4.5 this summer, or even by next year go up 4.5, and so this house you're waiting on, okay, it finally drops $25,000. Even though the house dropped $25,000 at a 4.5 interest rate, your principal and interest is actually 11.40. So your payment actually went up by $18. And then same thing, like right now, if you got people that were 3 months ago were looking at it back when the rates were 2.875, just the change from 2.875 to 3.5, that's $27 a month that has gone up. And then conversely, like say rates do end up going in a couple of years, say rates go up to 5.5, the same people that were waiting on the house at 250, they would have to have that house would have to drop in price to 183 just to have the same payment. I mean, that's the power of the interest rate. Obviously now, if you have a $100,000 purchase, interest rate doesn't matter as much. But once you start getting up $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, every eighth could be a large sum in your payment.
Sure. So, and we're talking averages here, the average home cost in this area. So, unless the interest rates really spike and the prices don't fall in addition to the interest rate increase, or something really crazy happens, which, based on the current state of pretty much everything, I'm not ruling it out. But, unless something really crazy happens, consumers don't necessarily need to fear interest rate hikes. Obviously, they want to buy lower if they can, but if it goes up another percent or two, it's not really going to make or break somebody.
No, I mean it shouldn't, but it could be like your first time home buyers where the debt to income is really tight, especially like if someone's looking at a USDA loan, they're very strict on their debt to income. So depending on the credit score, it's either 29.41 front end back end or 32.44. So your front end debt to income is going to be the amount of money you make divided by your loan amount. Your back end is the amount of money you make divided by your loan amount and your current debt. So if you start getting interest rates, so these people that were qualified 3 months ago, they might no longer be qualified. A lot of your first time home buyers, but it all depends on how tight they are. Now, if they're going FHA, where they're a lot more forgiving, they could go up higher and it probably wouldn't be an issue, or conventional, whatever. It really would, the higher interest rate would probably hurt the USDA consumer, the people that don't have the money down. I mean, that's what's going to really hurt them the most.
Sure. So basically what you're saying is that people should call me, find a house, and call you right away.
Yeah, you don't want to wait, because I mean the other issue is this whole supply and demand. So I mean that the demand is going to keep the prices of houses up even if the rates go up, because the problem is we're living through this pandemic and people stopped building houses in the past couple of years. So it's going to take Maine maybe 2 or 3 years to recover. Whereas, someplace in Florida where they got companies that literally can build 50 houses a month, they can recover a lot quicker than the rural areas.
Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, and, let me know if you disagree, a higher interest rate, I think, the interest rate should go up. I think it should be a little bit higher. It's good for the economy. Temporary periods of time where interest rates are low are good, but only short term. You get a slight boost, but then when that becomes the norm, you're going to see people saying things like, well, 2.9%, why can't I get 2.8 or 2.7? And then when that becomes the norm, it's why can't I get 2.5 or 2.4%? And it just never ends. So I think no matter what the interest rates are at, people are always going to want it lower. But when the interest rate goes back up a little bit, things kind of start to level out in the price of the real estate. But when they're so low as we've seen, prices just keep going through the roof. And so I think kind of things need to kind of cool off a little bit. Interest rates go up. I'm not talking 7, 8, 9%, but a moderate rate increase to kind of level things out a little bit. What's your stance on that?
Yeah, I mean, real estate really does help drive the economy. So as long as we don't go up too much over 4, you start getting to 5 and 6, that's start getting a little excessive. If they can kind of keep it at hopefully 4 and under, would be ideal. It's just because it's just not going to have your your flexibility. People kind of going to be kind of stuck a little bit. So as long as if they can keep it like 4 and under, it won't be so bad. But again, even if it's at 4 or 4.5, people are always going to shop rates.
Right.
They'll sometimes they'll go online and they'll see, oh, this company can give me this rate, but your rate sometimes isn't the be all end all. You might not close.
Right.
Because that's the difference with some of these online lenders and stuff. It's just, it's just the track record isn't as good, and there's multiple reasons why. Sometimes it's just better to go local, and that 1/8 of a point that might be different. What is it? Is the stress of telling the kids, oh, sorry, we're not moving in. This didn't close, or it's just sometimes it's really not worth it. But I think if they can keep the rates to 4 and under, I think we'll be fine. It's just they start getting more than that, then that's when I think people are going to start having a larger impact.
Sure. So I've heard some economists say because mortgage rates are tied to 10-year Treasury notes, which in turn are affected by the decision to buy stocks or bonds, and if the stock market's doing well, it kind of pulls everything else up with it. So unless there's a huge correction in the stock market, interest rates will remain low. Would you agree with that, or do you think right now we're seeing something weird where the economy is actually being driven by real estate and not the stock market as it usually is?
Yeah, it's definitely kind of see it's more driven by real estate. That's the one item they're not making any more of. However, I'm kind of touched on it earlier, but the 10-year Treasury note, it's an indication, but it's not really. It doesn't really have much to do with that. When it comes down to it, it's the mortgage-backed security bonds. So like I said, when the stock market's doing good, people are more apt to pull money out of the bonds so they can potentially make more money in the stock market. And conversely, when the stock market's not doing as well, people get scared, pull their money out of the stock market and put it in the more safe of the bonds. So it's really, I think it's really more have to do with that.
Okay. So to kind of wrap things up, I know you don't have a crystal ball, because if you did, you'd probably be on a Caribbean beach with a nice fruity drink in your hand right now. But, what is your best guess as to where we're headed and kind of what we're in for in 2022?
It's obviously, with the pandemic, everything's really hard to predict. But I wouldn't be surprised if they go up to 4.5. I'm hoping that's not the case. Hopefully it's, in the past, when at some point, the government steps in, they start, because what happens is the government starts buying more mortgage-backed securities. So when they do that helps drive the rates down, which was what happened a couple of years ago. So if the rates start getting too high, and then if the government steps in and starts buying more mortgage bond securities, then that's going to drop the rates. If the government doesn't step in, then yeah, we could be seeing 4.5 or even higher by the end of the year.
So if somebody wants to get in touch with you to talk about a mortgage, how can they do that?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways. Obviously, phone call and text is always quickest and easiest. So that's 207-478-2065. Email So it's just my name, Mark Lloyd at leader, the number one.com. And then they also, if they want to make an appointment or just do an application, then just go to my website, marklloyd.com. That's for doing the application online if they want to schedule an appointment. It's talkwithmarklloyd.com. So there's a lot of .coms there, a lot of ways to get a hold of.
And a lot of Mark Lloyds.
Yes, you want to brand yourself.
Yeah, and Lloyd is spelled with two L's, L-L-O-Y-D.
Yes.
So it's phone call or text 207-478-2065. Mark Lloyd at leader1, that's the number one, not spelled out, .com, is that correct?
Yes.
marklloyd.com or talkwithmarklloyd.com, and they can actually schedule right on your calendar on that one.
Yes, I can.
Okay. Anybody, any type of loans that you do or any types of mortgages, such as first-time home buyer,
so it's like
conventional.
Yeah, so we do the conventional loans, so that gives you your Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and then you have your FHA, which is can be targeted for first-time home buyers, but not necessarily. They're just the most forgiving on the credit score requirement. You got your VA, and then you have your USDA. The big advantage of the USDA and the VA, they're no money down programs. Obviously, you have to be a veteran for the VA program, and then for USDA, there's an income limit. So you just have to be below that limit and fit the tighter income requirements. But there's usually a way.
Yep. Cool. Well, I appreciate you taking your time a second time to talk with us. I know you're very busy, so definitely appreciate it. It's Mark Lloyd at leader1.com, 207-478-2065, marklloyd.com, or talkwithmarklloyd.com to schedule right on your calendar. Mark, thank you.
Thank you.
You're listening to the RealCast podcast with Mike Connors.
That was Mark Lloyd with Leader One. Appreciate you coming on, Mark. Again, to get a hold of him, Mark Lloyd, Lloyd with two L's, L-L-O-Y-D at leader1.com. 207-478-2065, text or call. marklloyd.com is his website, and to schedule right on his calendar, talkwithmarklloyd.com, and we will link to all that down on the show notes. Again, one more time for good measure, Mark Lloyd at leader1.com, 207-478-2065, marklloyd.com, or talkwithmarklloyd.com, and you can schedule right on his calendar. Again, thank you so much for taking double the time to come on and talk to us. Great information from Mark Lloyd. Reach out to him if you have any questions about mortgage. So Redfin's second prediction is that new listings will hit a 10-year high, which will hardly make a dent in the ongoing supply shortage. Now, I agree with this one. Demand is so high right now that even if there's a small percentage of new supply entering the market, demand is still going to remain high, and there will still be a shortage. Historically, this time of year, demand starts to slow down. People don't want to move in the winter, people don't have money because they just spent too much on Christmas presents, or whatever the reason, demand slows down during the winter months. That's true for both the selling market and also on the leasing side of things. But that just isn't taking place right now. People are starting to get comfortable with this market and the price of real estate. The other thing is that homeowners are seeing this crazy market and they're thinking if they list and sell their house, unless they have a second home or something already lined up, they may not be able to buy another one and will have no place to go because there's no supply. So they hold off on listing out of fear. Now, if we do see a drop in appreciation like Redfin also predicts, the market may become slightly less competitive. And I'm not saying the market will become much less competitive. Take the competitiveness.
You'll have to excuse my friend. He's a little slow.
Competitiveness of the market currently and cut it in half. And then half that again, and half that again. And for good measure, half those halves 5 more times. And that's the marginal reduction in competitiveness you're likely to see. But if we get to that point, people may be more willing to list their homes. But keep in mind, unless they have a second home, these sellers will now become buyers. My point is that I think we're in a seller's market for a while because the process is just going to keep repeating itself. The next prediction is that rents will increase by 7%. And I think this one's probably spot on. Rents will increase by at least 7% and maybe more. And this is nationwide I'm talking about here, so you may have some markets where it's a bit less and you may have some where it's a bit more. But what's interesting is that inflation may very well be at around 7%. So really, if you're a landlord and you increase your rent by 7%, you're essentially at a net zero. You may be asking more money, but you're really not making any more. And the last prediction I want to talk about, because I think it's interesting, is prediction number 10, and that is that the DOJ will crack down on how real estate agents are paid. She predicts that in 2022, the Department of Justice will crack down on how agents are paid, and it's possible that buyers will eventually have to pay up front for their agent instead of the more common setup now, where the seller pays the commission for both the buy side and the sell side agent at closing. The Department of Justice wants more transparency around how fees for home buyers and sellers are set, according to NYU law professor Scott Hemphill. Apparently, the DOJ issued a subpoena that suggests that the way the home sellers determine how much the buyer's agent is paid could be in jeopardy. I'm not sure where I stand on this. It doesn't really look great for agents, but it will be interesting to see how this all shakes out and what happens here in 2022. That's our show for today. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notifications icon. And let us know what are your predictions for 2022. Leave it in the comments below. And don't forget, if you have a question about mortgages, first-time home buyers, VA loans, any of that, conventional loans, reach out to Mark Lloyd. He took his time to be here today to answer our questions. We really appreciate it. I know I've said it a lot. It's down in the show notes too, but Mark Lloyd at leader1.com, 207-478-2065, marklloyd.com, or you can schedule right on his calendar, talkwithmarklloyd.com. That's our show for today. Thanks for tuning in. This has been the RealCast podcast. Have a good one.